Welcome back. I'm Hanne Larsen, and in the following I'll briefly discuss various aspects of international management. The most common problems in management across different cultural contexts are not technical or administrative. The biggest challenges lie in miscommunication, misunderstanding, personality conflicts, poor leadership, and bad teamwork. In this session you'll explore what is different about leading in a global context, and towards the end of the tutorial you'll get some advice as to topics you may discuss in your company when a manager from one environment interacts with executives or with employees from different cultures. As mentioned in the previous introduction to cultural value dimensions, it's of great importance to consider and understand how your own cultural background affects your way of thinking and acting. So the first important element towards obtaining effective global management is regarding your own management style as one approach in a world where other valid styles exist. So you need to rise above your own way of doing things, otherwise you're more likely not to see the vital differences in another environment. Therefore, please consider for a couple of minutes what management style you find typical for your culture. Also consider if you have experienced different expectations to you as a manager abroad than in your home country. I would also recommend you to discuss such issues with your colleagues. The example that is included here depicts a conversation between a Danish manager and his Greek subordinate. When the manager asks, "How long will it take you to finish the report?" he expects the Greek to put forward his estimate, whereas the Greek expects the Danish manager to give him a time limit. This shows that different cultures lead to different perceptions and potentially to a breakdown in communication. The example clearly illustrates that managers need to consider why the employee and the manager himself have certain expectations and how these may affect the communication. In the following, I'll give you some examples of cultural factors that may affect the relationship and communication between managers and employees from different cultural backgrounds. Focus will be on aspects related to time, structure, power, communication and context, as well as competition. First, I'll comment on aspects of time, or what is called monochronic versus polychronic cultures. The differences in time focus can be seen, for instance, in the role given to formal meetings and plans. In monochronic cultures, meetings most often follow predetermined plans and deadlines, and when organizing things, the approach used in general is structured, linear, and focusing on the task. In polychronic cultures, however, meetings often function more as an opportunity to reflect on certain issues and to allow people to discuss how things are going or should be going. In this case, actual decisions may come later during further discussions. Besides, in polychronic cultures, when organizing things, managers and employees in general use a less structured approach that focuses on the people involved. It should also be kept in mind that, especially in the Scandinavian countries, there is a distinction between work time and social or home time. This means that employees draw very clear boundaries between work time and personal time, and do not find it reasonable to work a lot overtime, as is common in the United States and Asian countries, where the distinction between work time and personal time is not as pronounced. I'd like to show you this quotation made by a German manager working at IBM in England. It reads like this: "I found that most lunchtimes, and particularly on Fridays, the vast majority of my management team decamped to the pub. I stopped that right away. Now they're not allowed off the premises. It didn't make me very popular at the time, but it's not good for efficiency. There's no way we would do that in Germany." The point is that if the German manager had been assigned to a more distant country, he might have better anticipated the cultural differences. That he reacted so strongly indicates that these differences were unexpected, and his reaction tells us as much about his home culture, and perhaps that of the company IBM, as about the English culture. namely about the German concern for efficiency and for policies and procedures. The word structure refers to the individualist and collectivist value orientations that concern the relation between the individual and the group. If a manager is to operate in a new culture, she must learn how to motivate her employees, and she must decide to what degree employees should be involved in decision making. In individualist cultures, managers expect employee initiative and that employees defend their personal interests. Employees in such cultures are encouraged to be independent and are most likely motivated by individual advancement and autonomy. Besides, the company is not expected to look after their employees' career development, which is more up to the individual. We must beware that the majority of the world is actually collectivist. In collectivist cultures, the interests of the group are more important than individual interests, and employees are encouraged to act according to orders and to avoid expressing opinions that go against group decisions. Besides, the feedback is commonly provided on a group basis and may be given to a group even when it is intended for an individual. As for career development, promotion is most often based on seniority, and managers are evaluated according to how well they conform to organizational or group norms. Different cultures have different shapes of hierarchies, as discussed previously. In egalitarian cultures, there is a preference for flatter organizational hierarchies, and managers in flat organizations rely less on personal power and authority and more on explicit rules, standards, and procedures. In such cultures, a consultative management style is preferred in which the manager facilitates the subordinates. In egalitarian cultures, employees are willing to question or even challenge the views of their superiors. Employees also feel at ease socializing with their superiors and addressing them as peers. Consequently, it's obvious that a manager coming from an egalitarian culture will have to change his or her management style when dealing with employees from a hierarchical culture. In countries where the national culture is hierarchical and paternalistic, employees perceive their leader as a father who possesses great authority and knows what's best for the group. In such cultures, people expect those in power to be entitled to their privileges. Subordinates in general avoid making decisions or taking on any responsibilities for making any decisions. They are also willing to support and accept the views of superiors, as questioning their opinions would be seen as a lack of trust. Employees in hierarchical cultures expect to be closely supervised and feel comfortable with a directive supervisor. This survey asks, is it important for a manager to have the precise answers to most of the questions that subordinates may raise about their work? The survey shows that how employees' expectations to their managers vary across cultures. It may tell us something about potential tensions if a manager from, for instance, Denmark gives very general answers to his Spanish employees and expects them to work out the details themselves. The Spanish employees, however, would expect the manager to provide them with precise answers. This means that national and organizational cultures influence the kind of management found to be acceptable and effective by people within a certain culture. For instance, a participative management style where managers involve others in decision-making is viewed as an essential way of working among most German leaders and organizations. However, this style is viewed as a weakness among many firms and leaders from Saudi Arabia, where authoritative management is perceived as a strength. Here I'll comment on different approaches to management depending on whether you operate in a direct culture or an indirect culture. In direct cultures, plans are usually explicit, detailed, and information-based, and guidelines on who is responsible for which task are explicit. Also, work performance and conflicts are usually dealt with in an explicit and direct manner. In indirect cultures, plans are more implicit and less detailed in terms of instructions, but they are understood according to the context. The same often applies to job descriptions and responsibilities. Criticism is usually not expressed openly, and conflicts are sometimes suppressed because employees and managers risk losing face, and feedback is not given explicitly to avoid confrontation and damaged relationships. The greatest challenge in the controlling and monitoring stages of management is giving feedback to subordinates. In Western cultures in general, we tend to be individualistic, and managers tend to use individual positive feedback to motivate employees. But in Asian cultures, giving positive feedback to individuals is not very common, as it may embarrass rather than motivate the individual. Consequently, compliments and criticisms in Asian cultures are usually not conveyed openly, or if they are directed at a group and not at an individual. In masculine cultures, employees are encouraged to take individual responsibility. This also means that individual reward systems are highly regarded, for instance in the USA, where you have the system of the Employee of the Month. In such cultures, employees would also be motivated by individual bonus programs. However, we shouldn't forget that even though a country has a high masculinity score, it does not necessarily encourage individual competition. Take a country like Japan, which is one of the most masculine cultures in the world. Since the country is both masculine and collectivist, you wouldn't see competitive individual behaviors. What you would see is a severe competition between groups instead of individuals. In masculine cultures, managers have more of a leadership role. They are expected to set demanding targets and to primarily ensure bottom line profits in order to satisfy shareholders. In feminine cultures, competition among employees is low, and job satisfaction has not only to do with a good salary, but also with working in a pleasant environment. Therefore, employees are selected on their ability to interact well with other team members. In such cultures, motivation derives from a sense of belonging, and as I mentioned previously, the manager should not praise individual but team performance. If he did, employees would feel uncomfortable and would lose face in front of the others. An example of this might be Thailand. Here, the introduction of an individual bonus plan, which runs counter to the norm of group cooperation, may result in a decline rather than an increase in productivity, since employees refuse to openly compete with each other. In feminine cultures, the manager has more of a facilitating role and is expected to ensure a stimulating work environment and to create the necessary group culture. In the following, I'll give you some ideas as to points you may consider yourself and hopefully also discuss with your colleagues. First, consider which of the aspects mentioned that you need to take into consideration when cooperating with business people and managing employees from other cultures. Next, consider and discuss whether there are any particular management styles in your company that may conflict with the cultures you cooperate with. I would also recommend you to discuss which management tasks you need to pay attention to in order to improve cooperation and communication between managers and employees across cultures. You may consider areas such as planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. And when discussing these points, of course, you need to remember to take cultural differences into consideration. Discussions may include how to involve employees in decisions, how to motivate employees, how to inform employees of expectations, how to express recognition and praise, and how to give rewards. Furthermore, you may discuss, do employees expect their manager to tell them what to do, or do they expect to give their input? Should employees solve problems themselves, or should they bring them first to the manager? Also consider whether language barriers pose problems. And regarding choice of language, please consider whether the employee's inability to express themselves fluently in a foreign language may prevent them from communicating openly with you. Also consider if you risk alienating yourself from the employees by choosing specific words to communicate, and in that way signaling that you are a member of a particular culture or subculture. Finally, I'd like to put forward some suggestions for managing successfully across cultures. First of all, there is no particular toolkit available for you as a global manager, but the points you need to consider are, for instance, to recognize your own cultural profile as discussed in previous modules, to seek information about the culture or cultures in question, to analyze different levels of culture, and for this purpose you need to use different approaches of observation and questioning and interpretation. You must also realize that results are achieved through relationships. It's easy to underestimate the fact that in many countries, personal relationships are the single most important factor in determining who your business partners are and how decisions are made. Such relationships may take a lifetime to cultivate and maintain. And finally, you should put an effort into building third-way solutions, meaning that when communicating, what matters is that we meet in the middle. Thank you for watching this tutorial on culture and management, and please continue to the next module for information on multicultural teamwork.